Hi, and welcome back to Life in Christ TV with Margaret Richards. Again, I'm Margaret Richards. You probably figured that out by now. So I want to welcome you back. We started talking yesterday about prayer and the different types of prayer and the amount of prayer that we should be praying. And we ran out of time. So I'm going to kind of reiterate a little bit of what we talked about, and then I'm going to finish what I had, to share with you guys. So the first thing that I shared was that back in 1996, my mentor had told me she wanted me to pray 3 times a day. And I showed a couple scriptures yesterday of Daniel and of David, how David prayed 7 hours a day and Daniel 3. And that really, to have that relationship, to hear God, you really need to be spending time in prayer. I did bring up pastors and what Nita had told me about they're not really hearing God as much as they need to be. But that's not just for pastors, that's for people as well. We're all to have that individual relationship, and it takes time. And yeah, I know that we're busy in our schedules and everything, but sometimes we got to choose: is TV or bingo or sports or going out to dinner or spending time with God. And I know the other times are important too, but God says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all this will be added to you. So I can't express to you enough the miracles that I've seen, the power of God that I've seen, the victory that I've seen, the blessing that I've seen. And that really truthfully comes by pursuing that relationship with God and praying. And so I was praying 3 hours a day, and I asked God, are we doing any good here? And God gave me a miracle of having a minister visiting from Texas, that was up in Portland, Oregon, and I was down in Salem. He came down and ministered, and in 2.5 days, God packed out that place with no advertisement, nothing. It was just something divine that God did. And then I shared about my brother Gary, how, after getting enthused and kind of going, yeah, this is cool, how God had told me that my brother Gary was the first fruit, and that God had given me a vision of a God holding a package a week before and after Christmas. And then Gary died January 8th. So it didn't compute to me, but God sees things differently than we do. It's one of the things that I've learned. It is what he says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours. So some things that we would see as bad, like my brother passing away, God saw that as he gave me a gift. And what was that gift? That gift was salvation. My brother is in heaven because of the prayers and the intercession that I had done for his salvation prior to his death, for that fall. Not only that, but Gary was a guarantee. He was a first fruit of the salvation of the rest of my family. And since then, I have seen, my mom and dad saved, and 2 aunts, and of course my brother. And then I have an uncle, that's just turned 94, and he's not saved, but I believe. I've seen it, and I believe it. God does not lie. My uncle's going to be saved before he goes. And so then I shared, about my ex-husband, how he had kind of taunted a warlock and had suffered, the warlock had come back on him, but God was faithful and had broken off that curse. And then I shared how knock prayer, how I'd received a telephone call, and it was my mentor, who I hadn't seen in a long time, and who's an intercessor and a very powerhouse of a woman, for praying for the nation. And she was, all I got was a telephone ring, the answering machine for some reason picked up, and it was hi. I'm not even sure if it said her ministry name, but it said Nita, and then it said garble, 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 and static, Portland, Oregon. And that's all I had. And I went, Lord, what is this? I'm not going to let Satan steal this. And the Lord told me, go in and knock prayer, and I'll tell you where she's at. And so I went in, and God, call upon you, tell me where she's at. And I interceded for about 20, 30 minutes, and I came out, and God said, pray or put in Word Plus Church in Portland, Oregon, and that's where she's at. And it came up Word and Spirit Church in Portland, and so I went. And actually that meeting and 2 others broke off, an earthquake that was supposed to come to the Northwest. It would have been devastating. It would have been in the 9 category. But God, through intercession, if my people who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and repent of their evil ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will come and I will heal their land. And so that's what God did, and everybody thought an earthquake was coming, and then they mocked God, and they mocked God's people. What earthquake? No, God gives those revelations not to, not so that you know what's happening. I mean, that's part of it, but so that you know and that you intercede against it, that you pray and repent for the sins of the nation or yourself or whatever sins, whatever is being attacked, and you say, God, forgive me, and then God's able to remove that judgment. And so, I know that some of you may or may not believe that, and I'm sorry, it is the way it is truth. God would not be a just God. He would not be Lord if he wasn't, well, it says a two-edged sword, if he wasn't justice and mercy. And he came to save people. But, at the end of the day, if we don't receive that, then there is an eternal judgment. And so that's what he saved us from. That's what he died for, was for our sins. And it's just, it's too bad that we don't have that understanding. Some do, but a lot of people don't. And therefore they don't respect or honor God. No, God's God. And God is real, and God's majestic, and God's powerful, and God is the King, and he is Lord. And so anyway, and I shared about knock prayer. That's what God told me. You go knock prayer. Ask, and ask, seek, and knock. So that's what I did. I knocked. Boom, 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 boom. I bombarded the heavens. And so now we got a little bit caught up. Ask, seek, and knock. One of the ways God has blessed me so much with so many giftings and anointings, and a lot of them came through ask, seek, and knock. I heard Bobby Conner one time, talking about his giftings and what God's given him, and they said, how do you get it? And he said, well, I went in and prayed, and I bugged God until he gave it to me. That's kind of what I've done. I have interceded for gifts, and some God has just given. But a lot has been through that 3 hours a day of praying and interceding to God. And, God, empower me, fill me with your spirit, anoint me. And God has given many, 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 many gifts. One of the ones no, I'm sorry, I just got corrected by God. So let me share this. I received many, many, many gifts, many impartations from the Lord. And a few years back, no, I can't share that either. I am so sorry. So we're gonna skip ahead. That's part of obeying God. That's part of my ways are not your ways, not my thoughts are not your thoughts. So maybe God will release that for another time. But right now we're gonna skip ahead. I love you guys. Sorry for it, but it is what it is. So let's talk about intercession and standing in the gap. Back a few years ago, back in the 90s, my daughter was going to Tualatin High School in Oregon. And just before Christmas time, just before, the break, I had a huge vision pop up in front of me of a lot that was by the house. And I just knew, word of knowledge, that she was going to be murdered and buried in that lot. And you can imagine, it freaked me out. And so I started praying and interceding, and it was during the day. This was not a night dream. This was during the day. And I'd never been through anything like this before, and I would see this big, huge picture in front of me, and I would start interceding against it, interceding and thinking, my God, what is this? And I was scared. Not a spirit of fear, but scared. There's a difference. Fear from the enemy is one thing, but an danger, like, there's something happening here, is a different thing. And so I had that for hours all the way through the day, and it kept going down in stages. I mean, at first, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 10 plus. It was just as big as it could get. And then the vision would kind of, it would kind of lighten and kind of like disappear for a second, and I think, oh, okay. And then it'd go boom, back up. And so I was praying hours, and finally, at the end, it got to where it was just lighter. I mean, like I said, it kept going down in stages, and it finally just became nothing, and it broke, and it was gone. And I thought, boy, that was weird. I've never experienced anything like that before, and I thought about telling Jim, and I thought, no, 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 no. I'm not even going to tell him because he'd think I was nuts. You know, that was just weird. But it was very traumatic. It was very, very, very serious and very strong. Like I said, it was an open vision, and just the word of knowledge. This is what's going to happen, and this is it. So Christy and I were talking at Christmas time, and we got done with dinner and decided to walk around the block. And she said, "Mom, you know, let me tell you what happened." And I went, because up until this point, I had blown it off as that was fruity, that was weird. I just, you know, I kind of forgotten about it and put it on the shelf until my daughter said to me, "Mom, you know, let me tell you what happened." And I went, oh my God. I didn't even let her finish. I go, "Let me tell you." And I told her what had happened, and then she told me that she had been walking to school, and that when she turned a corner, that she had seen two men that were building a house. They were contractors. And the one had started, you know, yelling at her, "Come here," you know, profanities. Just, she was very, very scared. But she looked down and just started praying. And as she did, she looked and she saw two robes on each side of her of angels. And so it made her feel better, but she also transferred to the opposite side of the road. And just as she passed by, you know, this man was just over the edge on bizarre and yelling and "Come here," and very, very scary situation, although she had the angels. So when Christy wouldn't come here and she was getting past, he got into his car that was up on the sidewalk, which really wasn't a sidewalk yet because they were building everything. And he tried to come after her, and he couldn't. The car would run, 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 you know, like you're pressing on the pedal, but the car wouldn't go anywhere. It wasn't moving. And, you know, there was just these angels that had their hands on that car that were not letting that man come after her. And she went down and went to school, and, you know, that was the end of it. But God is such a mighty God. We have nothing to fear. God is faithful. God is bigger than anything and everything. We just put our trust in him. We just pray. You know, we just believe. And we just intercede when he tells us to intercede, and do what he tells you to do, and say what he tells you to say. And we have victory, and we have the blessing all the time. But that was huge. That was my first experience with it. And then I went, oh my gosh, that is real. And see, God showed me a vision, the same as he did with showing that an earthquake was coming to the northwest. It really is the same picture. They're really parallel. You know, God showed me a plot of land that she was going to be murdered, raped, and buried in. But he gave me a vision, not so I could say, oh my God, look what's going to happen to my daughter, but so I could say, no, that's not going to happen. You know, God's going to intervene in this. God's going to put in his, more than 2 cents worth, but you know what I mean. God's going to put in his will, his agenda, you know, and it's not going to happen. Because God, you know, the gates of hell will not prevail. Well, same thing with the Northwest. That earthquake was going to come. God revealed it. You know, I mean, I was hearing it from the prophetic people and from ministers. You know, it's coming. It's imminent. It's here. And then we heard from Dutch Sheets. You know, get out of there because it's here. And then I got that telephone call, you know, from Nita, and everything was jarbled where the enemy was trying to block it. But see, Nita was from a different state. She had to have people from this state. That's why God wanted me there, because I was a powerful intercessor, still am, and God had to have me there representing my state to say, no, this isn't going to happen. And God intervened. He had people praying. He had people interceding. And as you know, that earthquake didn't come. Well, what do you have? You have the mockers. You know, you have the people going, oh, yeah, I've heard that. That's never going to happen. Yeah, look, they said it was going to happen then, but it didn't happen. No, it's not that it didn't happen because you can mock it like it was never going to happen. You know, that's ludicrous. No, God called people together to put out the word, to put out the prayer, to put in the standing in the gap, to intercede for our nation, to intercede for people, to intercede for our loved ones, so that we can see God's will and God's desire come into the earth, intervene in the situation, and cause it to turn, and cause it to turn out for his glory. Look at all the people that he healed in the Bible, or cast out demons, or he took a people, that were fishermen and tax collectors and that, and he took them and he said, I'll make you fishers of men. He didn't leave people the way that he saw them, the way that they were coming to him. They were dead in their sins. They had sicknesses and diseases. He didn't leave them like that. He intervened. That is the God that he is. He paid the price for our healing. He paid the price for our deliverance. He paid the price for our country. It's up to us to accept it. He paid the price for your salvation. It's up to you to accept it. It's up to you to say, yes, Lord, I receive you. Yes, Lord, I'll pray when you tell me to pray. I'll believe you. Can't remember. Oh yeah, Mark 16. Let me show you something. Matthew, Mark. It says, afterward, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at the table, and he reproached them for their unbelief and their hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who had seen him after he had risen. And he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. He who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved, but he who has disbelieved shall be condemned. These signs will follow those who believe in my name. They'll do all this. That's the thing. He even reproached, he even chastised his disciples for their unbelief and their hardness of heart, because they didn't believe. That's an important factor, people. It's important that you not mock God, because they said in the last days, people are going to mock and scoff at God and say, horse is coming. I've heard about it. Well, he's got a criteria. He's got a salvation in mind. He's got you wanting to be saved first. He wants to reach everybody first. He's not going to let you go. Not unless you just definitely turn away from him. But he is waiting to the nth time, to where he knows, he can't delay it any longer, so that everybody will be saved that's going to be saved, so they don't have to go through the terribleness that's coming. That's why. Don't mock God. Don't scoff at the things of God. Don't scoff and say, where is this coming? Well, yeah, earthquake, right. Well, this, right. No, don't do that. God is a loving and faithful enough God that he's interceded and he's made a way so that those things don't happen. For where the sin does abound, grace does abound much more. It's his grace that wants your salvation. It's his grace that wants you free. It's his grace that wants you healed. It's his grace that wants you, walking in the blessing and the fruitfulness of God to see his glory. Let's go ahead. So that was my daughter. And then my son was young, and he was at his cousin's house. And I was at home. I was praying or doing something, and he was over there. And all of a sudden, I got that same, something's not right. Something's not right. And so I started interceding for my son and binding the enemy from touching him and his mind, and praying a guard over his mind, and just praying for him and interceding for him. And then I felt that release. Everything's okay. And so my son came home later that day, not really sure when it was, and he told me that his cousins had been, one of them in particular, had been chasing him with a board, and the board had a nail in it and was trying to hit him over the head with a large nail. It wasn't a little tiny nail. It was one of the larger nails. And that's what God saved him from. It would have went to his skull. Miles had to fight, and wrestle away from, but he had divine prayer. He had divine covering to make sure that that didn't happen. And then another time he was at a summer camp, and I got the same thing in my stomach. Something's wrong. Something's not right. It was, it was like death time. And I started interceding and praying and going, God, something's not right. God, I pray you cover him. I bind the enemy from touching him. I pray a guard around him. And then Miles got home, and what had happened is that for some reason he'd fallen behind the other boys, and they had been walking to the camp, and he'd gotten lagged behind and trying to go up this little knoll or something, but he could feel that something was around him, and he could feel the danger. And he knew something was imminent. You know, you just sometimes know. And then he was able to get up and to go ahead, and it didn't happen. There was another time when he was much older, this was just a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5, that he was out hunting. And I got the same thing. I got it again. Oh, something's not right. Something's wrong. And I started praying for him, and I knew that he was lost. And so I started praying, God, you know, send your angels. Bring him, God. Bring him out of the woods. And then brought him, you know, he found his way into the camp. Otherwise, he would have been lost. He was out in the woods that he wasn't used to. He wasn't used to hunting. But God saved him from being lost. He saved him from the nail in his head. He saved him from whatever was going to happen at camp. He saved my daughter, you know, from them trying to hurt her. He saved my other daughter who was driving down I-5, one of the main, you know, drags down Washington all the way to California. And I got the same unction for her. And when I found out what was wrong for her and I prayed it through, and she came over, she said some guy was, you know, coming up really fast behind her and staying right at her side, and she was fearful for her life. And that's when God had me interceding and protecting her, or he would have done something. And you can say, oh, well, you don't know. No, I do know, because there's no way that you can have this happening here, neither one of the people know the intercession or the danger that they're in, and yet when the two people come together and say, this is what was happening, what happened, and they said, well, this is what was happening, what were you know, and you come together and it was the exact same timing. That's not coincidence. Those things just don't happen. So God's a faithful God. He protects us. He shields us. You know, he intercedes for our country. He intercedes for our lives. You know, through ask, seek, and knock. You know, he'll tell you where people are, or he'll bring gifts, you know, spiritual gifts into your life. I have had that so much to where I've wanted the power in a certain area or an intercession, or he's just given me a gift. But I've been praying to God, God, I want the power. I want your anointing. I want your authority, God. I want to fulfill my calling in your life and what you have. God is the God of all that, and he's the author, the perfecter of it. He loves to give good gifts to his children. So, okay, here's a good story of intercession and standing in the gap. My then husband was working for my brother's moving company, and I was up at my dad's, and I was with my kids, and all of a sudden I'd been out in the back porch, you know, talking to my dad, and all of a sudden I got go in and pray. And so I went into one of my dad's spare bedrooms, and I started praying, and I got down, I go, what is it, Lord? What is it? And I heard the Lord say, empower Jim's truck to make it through. Do what? Okay. God, I pray that you empower his truck to make it through. God, I just pray that you open it up. I pray, God, that you empower his truck to make it through. And I just kept praying that. God, empower his truck. And I'm thinking at the same time, empower his truck to make it through. That doesn't make sense. I've never heard that before. But I just kept praying until I got the release. And then about, I'm not sure how long it was, later, I was still at my dad's, I got a telephone call, and it was from him. And this is what happened. This is an amazing story. So he was driving down I-5, and he was in California. He was nearing LA, and he heard sirens, and he looked in his rearview mirror, and he saw a motorcycle coming up and weaving in and out of traffic, and he was being chased by police cars. And as he went by Jim, who was in a moving truck, and because the trucks are in the right-hand lane like they're supposed to be. Sometimes you don't find them in the right-hand lane like they're supposed to be, but they were. And so the motorcycle cut over and was on the embankment and went up around Jim and two more trucks that were in front of Jim. And then he cut off and came back in. Well, when he cut off the driver of the one up in front, and there was space in between, the guy slammed on his brakes. And of course, the chain reaction is the truck in back of him slammed on his brakes, and Jim slammed on his brakes. But Jim saw tomatoes, the back ends opened of the trucks, and tomatoes fell on the highway, which made it slippery. You know, tomatoes slip, and the truck started losing control, and the two in front of him started to come down like this because they were slamming their brakes, and they got almost to where they were down, and Jim at that time just held on. He thought he was dead. You know, he just saw those two trucks coming down, and he closed his eyes and thought, this is it. And then all of a sudden he wasn't dead, but he was frozen because of fear, and you know, he slammed on his brakes, and he was just, I don't want to see myself die. And all of a sudden, the police officer threw open the door. Jim just heard him. He's still frozen, and he said, "Who are you?" And Jim couldn't move for a second. The guy helped him move, you know, and stuff, got him unfrozen out of fear. And he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "My wife prays." And he said, "What happened?" Because when Jim opened his eyes, he wasn't not only not hit those two trucks that were folding down, but he was in front of them and on the side of the road. And the policeman said, "You don't know?" And he said, "No." And he goes, "Let me tell you what happened." And he said, those two trucks were coming down like this. He said, all of a sudden they picked back up and they separated, and your truck went through, and they came back down, closed down, and slammed on the ground. And he goes, "That's why I asked, who are you?" And he said, "Well, my wife is a powerful intercessor. She's a powerful, you know, woman of God." And the police officer wrote, "Act of God," in his logbook and in his report. Act of God. Now that's a miracle. And those aren't the only ones that I've seen. You know, God is a powerhouse. Prayer is powerful. Prayer has much more power than I knew in the 90s, when I was really, you know, like I said, like most people in the church. But those are some of the things I prayed since I've incorporated this, you know, 3 hours of prayer. I know we're kind of running out of time again, but I want to finish this, so bear with me. There's also crying out to God. There is faith where God's told you something and you just believe God and you stand in faith, but we're not talking about faith right now. There is more than one avenue that God works through. So yes, it takes faith, you know, like when my parents were dying, to say, "No, that's not what I believe, I'm believing this," and just to stand on that. But this is a different type. This is a crying out to God. You know, some ministers who are in faith say, "No, that doesn't work. You don't cry out to God. That's not faith." Well, yeah, it is. It's just a different kind of faith. So I had gone through some traumatic times, and I'd lost some of the gifts that God gave me. And I was praying, and I was interceding, and I was crying out to God for restoration. And all of a sudden, God spoke to me, because I'd been praying for a long time. I had lost these gifts, like a couple years before. And I was just heartbroken over it, because someone had intervened and had attacked me, and I had retaliated in anger. I had said nothing to them, but I just said, "I will never do that again," because they picked on the way that I was using my gift. And they started attacking me for the way I was using my gift. And they thought I should use it one way, and while God was having me use it another way. But you know, there's always those people that like to complain, that aren't gifted, that, you know, that want to attack your gifting. And I reacted to it, and I said, "Okay, I'll never do it again. I'll never use that gift again." And that's where, because I spoke in anger and I just declared it, you know, I lost those. And so now here I am a couple years later, and I'm interceding for those gifts back, because I'm heartbroken that I made the mistake and reacted to that person, instead of just saying, "That's your problem." You know, I'm praying. And I'm using the gift the way God gave me. And so I made a mistake. I sinned. We all sin. We all fall short of the glory of God. But God's a good God. And so here I was 5 years ago, this fall, in 2013, interceding and praying to God and saying, "God, I got to have him back. God, forgive me for what I did. I got to have him back." And I was crying out to God. And I was crying out to God and just saying, "God, I was so wrong. Forgive me." And the Lord spoke to me audibly, and he said, "I heard your prayer. To confirm it, you will get a deer tonight." Now, I know a lot of you people don't hunt, and you think all your food comes from the grocery store, but let me tell you, it doesn't, that there are actually animals out there, and And, there's nothing wrong with eating them. It's okay. The rest of us know this. So anyway, and the Lord's for it. So the Lord told me to confirm it, you will get a deer tonight. And so when the person in our family came and said, do you want to go hunting tonight? I said, yeah, I do. Because otherwise I wouldn't have, because I was kind of tired. But God has just said, you'll get a deer tonight. And it was a year, most of the time we'd get a deer, and it was pretty easy to get. We had a farm that we went out to. But this year, nobody was getting anything. It was just a very poor year. And so I was just kind of tired of going out hunting and kind of like wasting our time. But God has said, you're going to get a deer tonight. So my son and I went out and we walked the farm, and it was starting to get darker to where we didn't have a lot of time left, and we came around the back end of the farm and up by what was called the duck pond. And it really wasn't a duck pond, it was just an area that was sunken down, and it was next to the river, and a lot of times the deer would come out from the river and then kind of stay in that area because it was safe. And so we kind of hid back there, and all of a sudden a deer came out from the river, and it came just like this and then turned away from us. Well, my son was a little bit quicker than I was because I had a glove on, so I took the second to pull my glove off, to pull the rifle up. Yes, I hunt. And my son was just that much quicker than I am, and he shot it, and he shot, am I going to freak some of you out? If so, get over it. But anyway, he shot him right here in the head. He did an accordion move, and we went down there, and he split the skull. That is called a David and Goliath moment. That is called a miracle shot. It was a miracle shot. That deer was bouncing, and so even to hit that deer was a miracle. But to hit that deer and to split its skull, and I'm sorry I'm freaking some of you out, but it's time to rise up, was a miracle upon miracle shot. And Miles likes to say, I like to say God intervened, and Miles likes to say, hey, if it worked with David and Goliath, then it worked with me. I got the shot. And he's absolutely right. He got the shot. And it was such a miracle shot that you knew it was God's hand. And so God confirmed to me, I've heard your prayer, and I gave you this deer to confirm that I've heard your prayer. And, up until this moment, we're still waiting. Although God has opened the door and given the avenue, we're getting that now. We're getting that answer is coming into fruition now. It's a miracle. That's why God had us, start this TV ministry, and we're moving and doing some things, and we're in the process of God bringing that promise into fruition. But that's the power of God. Let me see, because we're running out of time. Fasting is another way. Do you guys want to hear some more? Or? All right, one more story. I'm sorry it's running late, but it's the last story, and then we'll go. So fasting is another way. I had been interceding for George W. Bush on the G8 summit, the first one after 9/11 when Bush got reelected in Brunswick, Georgia. And after leaving that intercession and praying for the president and praying for our country and interceding, I was flying back from Brunswick to Atlanta, and then I was going to go from Atlanta to Texas and pick up my son who was at a camp, and then from Texas to Oregon. And so as we left Brunswick to Atlanta, which was only like an hour and minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes away, I wasn't going to pray. I was going to sleep because it was really, really early in the morning. But I saw one of the other gentlemen that had been to the gathering that I was at to pray, and he was praying, and I thought, you know what, I'll pray. And so I prayed, and I started covering it in the blood, and all of a sudden I had a vision, the airplane like this, and I saw Satan 2 fingers, and he went boom, and the plane spun, and it crashed. It's like he flipped it, and it crashed. And I'm like, whoa, that scared me. I mean, think about being on a plane about ready to take off. I mean, you're taking off, and you had this vision. It's too late to tell the pilot I changed my mind. And so I was covering the wings, I was covering the tail, I was covering the nose and the blood. I was binding the enemy, saying, you're not touching this plane. And I prayed for about 10 minutes, and I got everything's okay. Well, that plane ride was as smooth as butter. It was just a beautiful flight. And I thought, wow, that's great, everything's done. But remember, in the vision, I had seen really smooth, and so all of a sudden, without notice, it's going along smooth, and all of a sudden the plane tipped and went phew. And I thought, oh my God. And I grabbed the back of the seat, as a lot of people, probably almost everybody in that plane, started yelling out a yelp. and grabbing hold because that plane flipped. And all of a sudden, it flipped back the other way, completely the other way. It's like the pilot went like this, but he overdid it and it flipped the other way, and then he brought it back, and then we went. And I was just like, whoa. That was scary. And I told the gentleman there, I got to talk to you when we get down. I shared with him what had happened. And so after that, I swore, I just going, I am never going on another airplane ride. I am never interceding, because I was doing a lot of interceding for the nation. And I am never doing that again. And so about a year went by, and I was praying for the promises, praying and interceding, and I just got to the point where I was fed up, and I said, I'm going to fast. And I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I'm going to fast. And I said, I don't care if we come in, or I don't care if I die, but one of the two is going to happen. And I don't care which way it goes. And so I fasted for a little over 30 days. I think it was 30 days. And at 27 days, I got the answer, but because I determined for 30, I went ahead and played it out. But at 27 days, I had a girlfriend who'd also been at one of the intercession things, and she called me from Chicago. And she said, Maggie, she said, I've been praying, and I feel I'm supposed to call you. I feel it's from God. And there is a conference with Chuck Pierce and Dutch Sheets and Emmanuel Carey and Kimberly Daniels and some other people in South Carolina. And I feel you're supposed to go with me. I feel you're supposed to go. And I went, oh no, that means an airplane ride. Can I call you back? Excuse me. And anyway, long story short, because we're running out of time, I knew it was God. And so, of course, I said, okay, Lord, I go, but you've got to promise me you'll keep that plane, kept. And he did, and I went. And God answered, and he showed me what to do and told me what to do. And I will share that story at a later date, because it was phenomenal what God showed out of that. But it shows the results of praying and fasting. It would take a long time to share that, what had happened. And like I said, we've run out of time, and I've shared the point of what I was trying to make about God answering prayer and fasting and the power of fasting. But I would not have gotten that answer had I not sought God and said, God, I'm fasting. I'm seeking you. I'm paying the price. So we know that fasting works to get answers. We know it works, for the country of my people who are called by my name. We know the intercession works. I can't tell you enough at the power of prayer and the time of putting in prayer time. And yeah, to you now, 3 hours may seem like a lot. Maybe you can't do 3 hours, but you can do 2. You can do 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. Well, you don't know my schedule. No, but I know if you want a relationship with God and you want to be hearing God and you want answers, and I'm saying then, turn off the TV or don't go to that dinner or whatever. Make the time. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all this will be added to you. Put God first rather than whatever it is first. I'm telling you, it'll be worth it. I've shared with you, just a few of the powerful answers that God has given. There are so many more stories that I could share and tell you. It's kind of like Jesus. We heard of just, I think, a couple weeks or a month. I mean, we didn't hear much. We've got the gospel. But they said if you were to hear everything that he'd written and done, books could not contain it. There was so much more than what we've heard about what God's done. And there's a lot more that I could share with you. But I wanted to kind of wet your whistle, to kind of get your appetite going, to know that there are miracles and the power of God through seeking God, through praying, through standing in faith, seeing the miracles. And I can't encourage you enough, to really take that step. And you may think, oh, this isn't doing anything. And then all of a sudden, wham, like God filling that church, and then Gary, and then. I mean, I've ministered to Al Gore. I've ministered to Princess Di. I'm telling you, there are miracles and door openings and things that are just awesome that God will do. But it takes you cultivating that relationship and taking that time to pray and taking that time to worship and taking that time to seek God. So I just encourage you, and don't put God in a box, and don't put you in a box. God is so much bigger. God is so much bigger than he is. And don't mock oh yeah, I heard an earthquake was going to come, or I heard this, oh yeah, that's not real. No, it is real. Don't have God chastise you for your hardness of heart and your unbelief. That's one of the main things that are a hindrance to people. God is, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Faith is a powerhouse. Prayer is a powerhouse. Decreeing is a powerhouse. Calling those things that are not as though they were is a powerhouse. And you put them all together, and you have a majestic God who is intervening into the realms of mankind and just showing his power and showing his glory. And you've got a front row seat. And that's pretty fun. That's pretty awesome to see the power of God display his glory, and you have a front row seat. I hate to end this, but I know that it's time. And thank you for watching. Thank you for, if you want to support this ministry, there are ways to do that on our website. And just if you feel led, pray about it. But just make a connection with this. Anyway, I love you guys. God bless you. And we'll see you next time. God bless. Good night.